Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, this workshop is being recorded. My name is Brian Sudia. I'm the program manager for the Made in Baltimore program. We are a program of the Baltimore Development Corporation, which is our city's economic development agency. The work of Made in Baltimore is aimed at supporting and promoting makers and manufacturers here in Baltimore City and helping to grow the buy local movement here in the Baltimore region. We offer a slew of business development services and retail programs and resources to small batch manufacturers, retailers committed to selling products made here in Baltimore City, production spaces, and maker spaces here in Baltimore. And we do a lot of this work through programs like this workshop series. Today, we are here with Dan Taylor from the Baltimore Development Corporation for commercial real estate technical assistance with BDC. Dan Taylor is the Managing Director of Business and Neighborhood Development at the Baltimore Development Corporation. Since joining BDC in 2013, he has managed the disposition and redevelopment process for more than 24 city-owned properties and has worked on real estate and economic development projects in commercial areas throughout Baltimore. Dan has been BDC's lead on the development of Harbor Point, downtown's Westside, and redevelopment of the Inner Harbor, and his total portfolio has generated over 1 billion in new private investment in Baltimore City. So give some snaps to that. We ask that you please remain muted through this presentation. We would love to see your beautiful faces if you are comfortable. No pressure. This is a safe learning space, so there's no such thing as a bad question. When you have a question, please quietly add it to the chat and it'll be answered during scheduled Q&A segments. Again, please don't feel pressured to keep up with note taking. I really want everyone to be as present as possible during this presentation. Again, we are recording it. It'll be posted not only to our YouTube, the Made in Baltimore program YouTube, but also to madeinbaltimore.org at a later date. Thank you to our parent agency, Baltimore Development Corporation. And with that, I am going to hand over things to you, Dan.
Thanks, Brian. Let me share my screen for everyone. Have it right there. And folks should see a big title slide. So as long as we're good there, then I'll start rolling through this. But I do want to thank Brian and Andy and the Made in Baltimore team for inviting me to present at this and for putting on these wonderful workshops. I think they're really outstanding ways to get information out, and I have learned things from them over the past. So Brian gave me a wonderful introduction, so I don't need to really introduce myself anymore other than to say, hi, I'm Dan Taylor. It's nice to be here with everyone. Just a quick little bit about BDC as I start to click through this presentation, which is either not moving or moving very slowly. Let's try that again. Okay. So BDC is the city's economic development agency. I'm going to hide that in case you see that as well. We're the city's economic development agency, and really our mission is to grow jobs and career opportunities for the people in the city. And we do that through retention, expansion, and attraction of businesses. A couple stats on our 2023 numbers. We'll have 2024 fiscal numbers relatively soon, but we worked directly with 124 different businesses throughout the city, retained a number of jobs that were already here, and many of these projects were ones where a business was expanding. We're coming to the city for the first time, and so last year we had over 3,000 jobs created. Those are new jobs to the city through the businesses that we worked with at BDC. So that folks kind of get an understanding of how BDC fits into the landscape, and there'll be another slide on this to some degree later. There are a number of initiatives and groups that fall under our BDC umbrella, Made in Baltimore being one of those. The Baltimore Together Economic Development Strategy is kind of generated at BDC, but is the economic development strategy for the whole city and drives a lot of what we do. There's also a network known as the BASE Network, Business Assistance and Support for Equity, that we'll talk about later, which is a group of organizations from throughout the city that work with different businesses in different stages to provide levels of assistance. And Made in Baltimore is one of those members and a lot of the partners that we'll talk about on this presentation fall under that network as well. And I say all of this to say that there are a lot of resources here in the city, BDC being one of them, to help small business owners figure out how commercial real estate works for them or can work for them. And so my hope is that in this presentation, we'll talk about where BDC and other partners can fit in and provide a little bit of guidance into some aspects of what you do if you're a business looking for new space, and where you go, what resources are available, and how assistance can be provided. And the good news is, if you don't get all the information that you want from this presentation, which you definitely won't, you should call us, because everyone's situation is unique, and BDC will assign someone to work with you to kind of help you along with your project. We're not going to do the work for you, but the idea is to steer you in the right direction, identify hurdles, and help navigate obstacles before they become real problems, so that businesses can focus on doing their business and not focus on stuff that isn't that core business. That's really the goal here. But we provide a number of different services, not just real estate assistance for small businesses. We have a number of incentive programs and loan programs that I'll touch on at the end. We provide assistance for businesses that aren't relocating. We do have some loan products, and we try to ultimately make the city a better place for businesses, both small and large. So I kind of start this with a question, and I here is not me, Dan Taylor, I is you. But this is kind of the question of, what do you want? If you're a business, what are you looking for when it comes to finding a space? And I understand that there are only 2 questions on this slide. There's a third question on the next slide. We didn't miss one. But I think this is kind of the core question to ask yourself when looking for a space, especially if you're looking for a space for the first time. If you're a small maker that's working out of your home and you want to come into a commercial space of some sort, of what do you really want? What do you want that space to do for you and for your business? And the first question that I ask people to think about is, where do you want to be? What neighborhood, essentially, what part of the city? The second I ask is, what kind of space are you going to need? What kind of space do you want? And are those 2 things the same? Right? It might be a space that requires you to have a forklift. That's going to be a certain set of requirements. It might just be a space where you can set up a table to put things together or fill bottles, right? That's a different kind of space. And do you see those needs changing over time? The third question is, what role do you want to play in the process of putting yourself into a space? And I'm showing this picture here. This is the 400 block in North Howard, and there are a number of wonderful local businesses there. Couples Tea House is there, and Cashew Creamery is there. And these were BDC controlled properties back around 2015 or so, when this was one of my projects. And they looked like the pictures on the bottom. And now they're beautiful, right? They're these wonderful spaces that are available and have great local businesses in them. But the businesses did not tackle this. And I bring this question up because there's always this feeling of like, wow, maybe I can get a property from the city, or maybe there's a space that's available and I should buy that space. And maybe you should. But lots of times those spaces to buy have real problems, and you need to go in eyes wide open of what those problems could be and what sort of obstacles it could create for your business when you're considering that as an option, as opposed to letting someone who does that do the work, turn it into the nice, pretty yellow painted building on the top of the screen, and then lease it when it's done. So this presentation kind of goes through those 3 questions to some degree around, where do you want to be? What do you need that space to be? And, how does the development aspect play into this versus the tenant leasing aspect? So step 1, find a place. Where do you want to be? And there's a resource that I've linked here. This runs through Baltimore SourceLink. It's actually a relatively new product that they put out called Size Up Baltimore. And it's nice because it's to some degree a market assessment tool. You could say, this is the kind of business I am. This is the type of customers I have. And it will actually help you identify places in the city that might be good fits for you on market potential. And if you're someone selling a product, that could be a really valuable resource for you. So I wanted to put that here. But there are other questions to ask too, from the where standpoint. And I don't attempt to answer these for anyone, but they're things to think about, right? Do you want to be close to customers? Are your customers people walking in a door, or are they other businesses? They need to be close to suppliers. Do you want to be close to your house? Do you want to be in a neighborhood that has nice amenities? Because if you're going to be there all day, you want to be able to walk down the street and grab a sandwich or grab a coffee for lunch. Do you need to be close to the highway, right? For deliveries or for your own commuting convenience or your employees' commuting convenience. So there are a lot of questions, I think, that come into play early on in this process around where do you want to be? And I start with this question because what most people do is they start with a map to say, well, what's available? Let me just see what's out there. And that, not that that's a bad approach. That's basically the second step. I think it might be my next slide. But I like to start with this more open question first to get an understanding of what you're really looking for and understanding where you might be willing to compromise one thing for another based on what is available. But oftentimes, what is available can be a constraining factor in your own thinking. So start to think about what really matters to you in terms of where you want to be in the city and what are those things that are important to you. One thing that I think is really important in identifying those places, both the specific places and the where of where you want to be, is to walk around. And you can drive around, and it's good to drive around to kind of get a sense, but I really do mean walk around. You get a much better feel for what's going on, the neighborhood feel, the surrounding areas, the pace of the neighborhood, see whether it's a good fit for what you're looking for. The other thing that it does is there may be no better way, especially for small commercial real estate, than walking around to see what is actually available, whether it's a sign in the window or a building that just looks empty. It's a really good way to get a sense of where opportunities might be. Because one of the things that you're going to see when we go through this is that the world of information on available properties is very fragmented and it is incomplete. And a really good way to kind of overcome that challenge is to get out there on the street and start to do a little research, right? And say, here's a property. What's going on in this property? Why isn't it listed? And this is where some of the partners can step in and help too. The other thing that it can do, and this is just through things as simple as seeing what kind of signs are in the windows, is help you identify a broker from the tenant side. And for a lot of folks, that can be really, really valuable to get a broker on board to help guide you through the process as well and point you towards properties that could be a good fit for your needs. And we often say, especially for buildings like the ones I'm showing here that are kind of medium-sized industrial buildings, it's really good to have a broker in your corner to help tease out some of those and provide some guidance along the way. So I would suggest get out there, walk around in these different neighborhoods and see what's out there for you. And then, of course, you can look online, and there are some online resources. The one that I highlight as the first one is called LoopNet. And LoopNet's really interesting, but when I say information is fragmented, this is what I mean. So there's a lot of information on LoopNet, and it's a place for properties to be listed, right? Properties that are listed for lease, and it's free for everyone. So this is why it's a good resource if you're not paying for CoStar or other things. The challenge with it is not comprehensive. People have to pay to list their properties on there, so not everyone chooses to do so. So only people who are paying to put their properties on LoopNet get them up there. So you see kind of a subset of available properties, but it starts to give you a taste of what's out there. If you wanted a more complete taste, you could go to CoStar. This is where a broker can come in and really help because they have access to CoStar. This is also where Made in Baltimore and BDC can help. For small businesses that are Made in Baltimore members, for example, we can assist by doing a CoStar search that meets your criteria. And all of these things are set up where you can say, do you want a property that's for sale or for lease? Is it an industrial property, a retail property, a flex space? What are the rents? what's available. So these are really powerful tools that can help identify. With all of these, I suggest starting with the world and then narrowing down instead of starting with really narrow criteria. But either way, there is a lot of information that is out there. Some is free and some is available through partners. A lot of stuff, especially at the small scale, if you're a small business looking for like a retail storefront on a some street, oftentimes those properties are going to fall below kind of that broker threshold or below the CoStar threshold. They usually get missed, especially if it's owned by a kind of a mom and pop property owner or a not especially sophisticated property owner. You might see those properties show up on Craigslist. There are a lot of properties for lease up there, or you might just see a sign in the window. And so that's really why I encourage folks to walk around first, look online second, maybe do those two things in parallel in different neighborhoods to try to get a better full picture of the information that's out there. The last resource I stick on this is city-owned property, and I did it reluctantly because of my earlier picture of a building with total interior collapse. There are resources for folks to purchase city-owned properties. The Buy Into Be More one, which is run by the housing department, is pretty comprehensive in terms of what city-owned property is available. Most of it is residential, right? It's mostly row houses that are in various states of repair or disrepair that are available for purchase. But there is a lot up there, maybe an overwhelming amount. BDC also has a small portfolio of properties that we occasionally put out for RFP. RFP being a request for proposals where anyone who's interested can submit a proposal to purchase a property for redevelopment. Those are also usually development projects and are not kind of move-in ready spaces. But I do throw those in there because it may be an appropriate fit for you or your partners or your team to try to develop a property, and those could be places to search for that may not show up in LoopNet, CoStar, or on Craigslist. Another place to go, and I would argue that this is maybe the most valuable place for information, is to find partners that are working in the place that you want to be. The screenshot here is an example. This is something that Highlandtown Main Street puts together, but different partners, and I've put a slew of them up here that are through the base network, work really closely in the neighborhoods that they work in, these place-based organizations. And they can give you the best, most up-to-date information that you could hope for in many cases, because they're there every day. They know what's going on with properties. They know what properties are going to be coming available, often before they become available. They can help facilitate introductions. And in some cases, I'm showing the Highlandtown Main Street one because I think it's so wonderful. Highlandtown Main Street has a little listing of their own. They're showing every property that they are aware of that is out there and available or potentially available for lease or for sale. And this is just a snapshot in their case. And there are other organizations that do this too. So I strongly encourage folks, when they're out there on the ground exploring their neighborhoods, to also look and understand who else is working in this neighborhood. Is there a business association, a business improvement district, an organization through the Baltimore Main Streets program, a merchants association, a CDC or Community Development Corporation? These organizations are tremendously valuable and provide a great resource for folks looking for a space. And I really encourage people to lean on them when seeking spaces. One thing, before I go to the next slide, one thing that's also important here that local partners and even citywide partners like BDC can help with are on information around upcoming projects. There are a lot of projects that are in the pipeline or sometimes projects under construction that are going to have spaces available in them. And it's a great opportunity to identify those projects, and BDC can certainly facilitate introductions. These local organizations can as well, to the people who are developing those projects, because they're looking for tenants more often than not, especially for ground floor commercial space or retail space. And it's a great opportunity for folks to get in the door before those properties are pre-leased, and opens up a kind of additional world of opportunities. It also is the type of opportunity to maybe get some of the space fit out, right? Or built while the project is being built as part of your lease. It's a little easier to do that when there are contractors on site. So another good way to use these organizations is to get an understanding of what's coming down the pike and get introductions into the organizations that are building some of these projects in the neighborhoods that you want to be in. So you found a place, right? You've gone through online, you've been out on the street, you've talked to people, you found a place, or ideally more than one, right? You have some options that you're choosing from. The second question to really ask here is whether or not the place is going to work for you. And as much as I've just said, you know, there's CoStar and there are brokers and there's local organizations, oftentimes you'll see in these listings what the zoning for a property is. Do not rely on what they say. Not because they're lying or even because they're wrong. It's just that they're not always right. And we have helped a lot of businesses who have gotten themselves into a bit of, you know, maybe before they've gotten into too much trouble, where they thought they could do the thing that they wanted to do in their space. And when we look at it, they cannot. And that can be a real challenge to overcome if you catch it too late. A simple or relatively simple way to do this is to understand what your business is. And I've highlighted two. And before I dig into this, let me say, BDC is here to help on this issue. Made in Baltimore is here to help on this issue. The Baltimore Planning Department is here to help on this issue. You will also, we'll talk about your team a little bit later, but you should also have a team that can advise on this issue as well. But understanding the type of business that you run and what use it is in the parlance of the zoning code is really, really important. I've highlighted two of them because some important things have happened in the last couple of years in Baltimore City. First one I highlighted is an arts studio industrial, which is basically a makerspace. And the second is food processing light, which is basically a makerspace for food products. Both of these zoning categories were subjected to a change in the zoning code that was really good news for all of you who run these types of businesses. And many, if not most, Made in Baltimore members fall into one of these two categories, especially the smaller ones. And the thing that happened is that both of those uses are permitted, that's the little P in this chart, are permitted in all of the commercial zoning categories in the city. From C1, which is just your kind of neighborhood commercial strip that you could think of, to C5, which is downtown, they are permitted. Just as a bit of, you know, zoning code 101, if you see something on this chart that is CB, that means it's a conditional use that needs the approval of the BMZA, the Board of Municipal Zoning Appeals. If you see CO on there, it means it's a conditional use that requires an ordinance of the city council. If you are a business looking for a space, the best scenario is that you find something with a P, that your use in the place that you want it is permitted where you want to go. And one of the reasons that these uses are permitted in all of the commercial areas now is specifically because of the work of Made in Baltimore and the advocacy of Andy Cook and the team over there and the work of the Baltimore Planning Department. So we did a zoning change just in the last couple of years that expanded the permitted areas from what you see on the left-hand side. They used to only be permitted in industrial areas to incorporate in all of the commercial areas for these small maker business uses. So there are tremendously more properties available today than there were just a couple of years ago where you can run your business. And that's really because of the advocacy of Made in Baltimore in making that change. And it's really, really good news for finding properties because it opens up a whole world of additional things. So that's the first thing to really think about is what's your zoning category? And of this menu of properties that you're looking at, can you do the business? You know, are you appropriately zoned for that use? And you can check this yourself. And this is a free resource. It's called Code Map. It's also run by the housing department. You can Google it. I've put the link at the bottom as well. And you can go through and click on any property in the city and it will pop up with what the zoning is. And that's a really quick, easy, free way to verify the zoning on the property. There are also other things that you need to watch out for. And I've highlighted a couple here. One is parking, for example. In the zoning code, it says, I've highlighted these for those two uses, if you're an art studio industrial, you need to have a parking space for every 2,000 square feet of your studio area. If you're food processing, you need to have a parking space for every 4 employees or every 1,000 feet of gross floor area. And if you're trying to locate on a commercial, a main commercial drag, it may be impossible for you to meet that requirement. In that event, you may be able to seek a variance. So if I were to maybe take a step back and talk about your ideal situation to your least ideal situation, your ideal situation is a property where you can do whatever you want by right, as we call it. The use is permitted, all of the zoning requirements related to off-street parking or setbacks or buffers, any of these land use requirements, you already meet them. So you kind of don't need to worry about anything from that from an entitlement standpoint, from the city allowing you to do the thing that you want to do standpoint. That's the best situation. If you can't find that, you may need to seek a couple little variances for things like parking. They're not easy. It can be messy. You should get a good land use team. I'll reiterate that a few different times in this presentation to help you navigate that process. But it's not impossible. The important thing to know on variances is that the idea behind getting a variance is that you would be able to meet the requirement, except that the specific conditions of your property make it impossible to do so. You can't meet the setback requirement because your property is already built and it's already you've got a funny property line. That'd be a good example of a case where you might want to go in for a variance. It's not the same as saying, I could meet the requirement, but I don't want to because it will be too expensive. That is not a good case for variance. It's supposed to be for unique conditions. And then kind of that third category would be, I'm not zoned correctly, or I don't have the variance and I need to do some real land use work, like a rezoning or something like that to make this the type of property that I need it to be. You're in for a long haul if you go down that road. That would be kind of your worst case scenario for a property and would be a reason to maybe move on to some of your other options if there are other options available to you. There are other pieces too. And again, BDC is kind of here to help on a bunch of things in the planning department as well, but a different property might be located in different areas that require different special reviews or have different requirements. You might be in a historic district that requires a special review by the historic folks, CHAP, the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation in Baltimore City. You might be in a floodplain. That's going to have an impact. You might be doing major new construction that sends you in through the design review process of the city, which is known as UDAP. You may have something that encroaches into the right-of-way. Maybe it's over the sidewalk or other things and requires a minor privilege permit. Might be new development that triggers stormwater, erosion, settlement control. You might be in a critical area. So there are all of these different things that you need to watch out for, most of which come into play if you're building something new or doing a major development of some sort. If you're buying a building or that's already built and you're not planning to do much to it, many of these things come off the table. If you're leasing a building that's ready for lease, most of these come off the table. So when you're thinking about kind of your risk tolerance and your need to get into a space within a certain amount of time frame, there are all these different factors that, again, eyes wide open as you're coming into something of what might come into play. And again, get a good land use team when it comes to this stage of that analysis. Will the place work for what I need it to do? And that kind of brings us to this particular question of, should I rent a space or should I own a space? And that's a business decision to make. There are good reasons to do either one, depending on where you are in your business. I usually subtitle this one. In fact, I've literally subtitled this one, Do You Want to Be a Developer? Because if you don't want to be a developer, don't put yourself in the position where you're going to have to be. I've highlighted in the photo here Hex Ferments, which has a beautiful store that they put together a couple of years ago, and they bought it. And I cannot speak for them around their, how happy they are. They're a wonderful business and they're doing a wonderful job over there. But they went through it when it was time to develop this building. And it's a really difficult process. They found some environmental issues that they needed to address that they weren't expecting going in. There were things that they expected to remain, like there was a curb cut, and the business said this property will be great because there's a curb cut there and that'll work great for our deliveries. Well, in the city of Baltimore, just because there is a physical cut in the curb does not mean you are allowed to have a curb cut. Don't just assume that because you see it there means that it is permitted. And so there was a whole series of things that needed to be done to reestablish whether you could have the curb cut and how you do it and so on and so forth. And those are developer things, right? If you want to be a developer, you got to navigate all of this stuff. Otherwise, they are not going to let you open. If you have a building that is built and is available for lease, some other developer has already dealt with that. And I think that's a really important thing to reiterate as well, that if you have a business that needs to run and you making money in that business is what the important thing is. If you go and decide to be a developer, you have to be able to withstand the risk of development and the potential delays of opening the business. And I think that's a really important point, that a lot of people really value the security of owning a property, and especially the long-term security. Rents won't keep going up, but discount the challenge of getting that building built in the first place. So I lay out a few bullets here. I know other folks in this series have talked about renting versus owning, and why you might choose one over another. There is no bad choice, and it's a choice for your business to make. But again, eyes wide open as you're going into making these decisions about what the real challenges are and why you might choose one versus another. I know a lot of pretty pictures on this because this is like the driest of the slides, but you also need to assemble your team. And it doesn't have to be the same team for everything, but generally speaking, especially if you're doing development, you're going to want some sort of attorney in your corner, right? That's going to, at a minimum, maybe they're going to review your lease for you if you're leasing a property from someone, or providing other legal assistance for your business, like registering your business or doing things like that. And if you're looking at a property that's challenging, that needs some of that, variances or other type of zoning review, a land use attorney can be really, really helpful. Really on the development side, less so on the leasing side, but it never hurts to have a lawyer who is aware of those different things when you're looking at whether a property is a good fit or not. You might want an architect. If you're doing a real build out of your space, you are going to want an architect or some designer who can help you design that space to fit your business needs. If you're building a building, you're going to need one almost all the time. You may need an engineering team, or you might just need, a subcontractor, right? You might need an electrical engineer, but you might just need an electrician. Really depends. You might need a plumber. You might need, an MEP doing the engineering work. So it kind of depends on what your project is. I think the important thing to understand in this particular slide is if you have a property that is so-called turnkey, it's ready to rent and you can move right in and move your fixtures in, you're not going to need anywhere near the level of team that you're going to need if you're trying to take a vacant property and redevelop it for occupancy. And so your team is going to scale up or down depending on what those different project requirements are going to be. But you should have some team. I will say that. You should have some team in your corner, so it's not just you. All right, so you've picked a property, picked a neighborhood, you've identified your properties, you have one, you're ready to go, and it's permit time. And if you're like me, you looked at this slide and you kind of freaked out a little bit because there's just too much there. And that was done by design. I threw a lot on this slide. It's actually very simple stuff. It's an inspection guidelines form and a website and a couple of links, but it feels overwhelming. And frankly, the permit and inspection process feels overwhelming to almost everyone. When I talk about your team, one of the things I will emphasize over and over again is find a team that has built stuff in Baltimore City and has been through this process. That's not because Baltimore's permit process is especially difficult or especially unique. It's just that there are a lot of steps, and it really helps. It saves a tremendous amount of time to have someone on your side who knows what the steps are and how to go through them. I have put a number of links in here that can help you as the owner understand those steps. It's a question that you should ask a general contractor or different subcontractors, electrician, plumber, so forth, what their experience is here. But there are a lot of resources out here to assist with this, right? There are these permit guides through the housing department. They have a whole workshop series around permitting. There are YouTube videos and other things that I've linked here as well. And their inspection guidelines. And I think even this one pager that's on the right half of this slide can be really helpful in helping you wrap your head around what inspections you need and when you need inspections. The important thing to kind of take away from this is, with very limited exceptions in the city, if you are doing any work, it needs a permit and it will need to be inspected, right? That's just a general rule of thumb. And if you are building a building, you need extra inspections. You'll need a full building inspection, not just someone coming in and checking the electrical. If you're going to operate a business in there, you need a fire inspection, and your requirements for what you need to build will need to be well defined up front, and they need to be shown in the final product so that when the fire inspection happens, you've got everything you need. But it is a complicated process. BDC can help to some degree in navigating that process with you, but we can't lead it for you. You need to have someone on your team that knows what they're doing and is able to go through this, so that if there are issues that we can help kind of figure out, you have someone who can then resolve them that is on your payroll and working through it. So the last slide or series of slides are there's some incentives for all of this stuff that runs through BDC. It does not matter if you are a tenant or a property owner. You would be eligible for any of our property improvement grants, and we have a few. I'm highlighting one in the slide here that we did with Found Studio up on Hartford Road just a few months ago. It's a total transformation of this building, absolutely beautiful, and they got this FIG facade improvement grant from us to help fund some of that work. And we have a series of different programs depending on, you could just be a new business moving in. You want to spruce up your storefront, that's great. We can give you a grant for that. It can be a big redevelopment of a building, that's great. We can help with that as well. So it doesn't need to be just the tenant. The landlords can apply for these as well. We do need to have a tenant in the building in order for them to qualify. We also just launched a new one for businesses called the Outdoor Spaces Grant, which is meant to activate outdoor spaces. This kind of came on the heels of COVID, when everyone was trying to figure out how to get outdoors and in the fresh air. But it created a lot of really positive benefits for the neighborhoods that businesses were in. So we wanted to encourage this over the long term through the creation of new and additional outdoor spaces for people to use. And the common one that you would think of would be a restaurant with outdoor seating, but it doesn't have to be just that. So be creative. Any business is eligible for this. We just want to make kind of publicly accessible outdoor spaces that people can use and help activate neighborhoods. And you can stack both of these grants together through BDC, and they apply right through us. There are also a lot of programs run through different partners, through the housing department in the city, through the housing department in the state. BGE runs a wonderful program called SEED, where if you have additional electrical or gas requirements that are coming to your property, there is a funding offset or a credit that you could be eligible for related to that program. There's funding available for energy efficient upgrades. There's area specific funding through the state or through the Neighborhood Impact Investment Fund that might be out there. And you can search a database of different incentives on BDC's website. That link is in the bottom. You can Google BDC incentives as well, and you can sort through a number of those different things. There's also one I didn't put on here because they're not a specific partner of ours, but BGE's runs through this, which is an organization called Hello Alice. They have a bunch of grant opportunities nationwide that get posted through there, and a lot of corporations run grant programs through Hello Alice. Never hurts to go on and take a look at some of the opportunities that might be out there to see if you can qualify to get a little bit of funding to fund your build out or your acquisition or your general operations of your business. And with that, I believe I will end my slides and open up for questions or other conversation.
Yes, please don't be shy about questions. The best way for us to get through questions, if you could either raise your hand or throw a question in the chat, that'd be a great way for us to kind of keep things organized and make sure everyone can get heard and seen in the way they need to.
Hand up from Andy Cook of Made in Baltimore.
I'll go ahead and break the ice on this one. First, thank you, Dan. That was extremely comprehensive. Since you mentioned in one of your slides the Heck Superette building on York Road, I wanted to follow up on that. I know that they acquired that building at auction, which is a way that I've heard some of our members finding buildings when they were having trouble accessing them on, I guess, more like the open market. Do you have any advice or knowledge about how one would kind of enter into that auction market?
Yeah. So one way to find auctions is walking the neighborhood is a good way for that, because most properties that are going to auction are going to have a big old sign on it that says public auction, some date. There are a few different auction houses out there that do this. AJ Billing, I think, is one. There are a couple others. You'll see the signs, and some of them escape me off the top of my head. But they'll show all of the auctions that are pending and upcoming. And oftentimes these auctions take place like on the courthouse steps, right? They're public auctions in a very literal sense. My opinion of auctions is that, especially if you are kind of small or just starting out, I would agree it's a good way to access properties if you feel like there's not much out there. The risk on them is you have a really limited to zero ability to do any due diligence on the property itself. And right, like you often can't get into the property to take a look at it. You can't bring your team in. You're kind of taking the property as is. So you might get a bargain, right? The sticker price might be a bargain relative to what you expected for a certain building. But you may find that there are problems with the building. They could be structural, they could be environmental, they could be entitlement wise, that you just aren't going to know. The entitlement stuff you can usually figure out beforehand, but that you just don't know, and you have to like buy it. there's not a due diligence period in your contract where you can really feel it out. So it's kind of a risk reward proposition. You might get a better sticker price, but you're taking on a little more risk that, I don't know.
Great. Thank you so much. I see a bunch of questions in the chat as well.
Yeah. And Brian, I fixed my screen so I can actually read the chat stuff now.
Wonderful. See, we in the game.
The first question I see is how much the new outdoor improvement grants for. Those are for $5,000. Those are matching grants, so if you spend $10,000 to create or improve an outdoor space, we will reimburse $5 of that. And it can be anything up to $5. If you spend $5, I'll buy you a cup of coffee or something. So that's the maximum amount of those grants. And then the facade improvement grants, the normal one is $7,500, but we can actually go up to $15,000 for industrial properties, corner properties, and vacant properties that are able to be redeveloped and get a use and occupancy permit. All of our grants are matching grants, and they are all reimbursable, with one quick exception, meaning that you spend the money first and then we reimburse once the project is complete. There are a few areas of the city, which are the neighborhood impact investment fund areas, where we will actually pay as you go, so that companies don't have to come out of pocket for that, because it can be hard to kind of float that amount of money. Second question on here, how do people reach out to BDC to get advice or support navigating all of these systems? So one thing you can do, and I say this realistically, is you can reach out through Made in Baltimore. I mean, Made in Baltimore is part of BDC. Brian is down the hall from me. And say, hey, I'm looking for some stuff. And that's, if you already have a relationship there, that's a really good entry point into BDC. And then we can assign an economic development officer from BDC to then work with the business on whatever those things are that the business may need help with. You can also reach out to me directly, and I may be able to help with a quick question. I may be able to assign you to an economic development officer. So there are a few different entry points. The base network is another great entry point, where if you're a business that has a relationship with a member of the base network, that's a good time to say, hey, I need help with these sorts of things, and allow the network partners to say, oh, BDC might be able to help with this piece, and this organization might be able to help with that piece, and this third organization might be able to help with that. So yeah, there are a few different entry points. When in doubt, send us an email to info@baltimoredevelopment.com. Call our main line. You know, someone will answer and respond. And the main takeaway here is that we will assign a person at BDC to work with your business on the thing that you want to try to do. That's the takeaway. Can you share more about the commercial corridor work that BDC has been doing, whether you expect any more resources to come online for property improvements? I don't want to take us too far off topic on the commercial corridor work as it relates to this particular thing, other than to say, we are deeply invested in the improvement of neighborhood commercial areas. Right now, we do not have any more resources than more or less what I've already talked about. I don't know whether there will be new programs or new resources that may develop out of that work, but it's a really big point of emphasis for us in making these commercial areas good places to do business, making sure that there's a diversity of businesses that provide kind of a breadth of services to people in the neighborhoods that surround them, and ultimately making sure that these are places that people want to shop and visit, and that they meet the needs of the surrounding communities. Question around my email address, and that was responded to in the chat as well. And let's see here. Should a new business interested in leasing a property secure funding before reaching out to the owner or developers to discuss further details? And this is really a question around timeline of securing space. So if you're leasing a property, I don't know that you need to secure funding per se, and this is just kind of my opinion here. But if you're planning to lease a property, yeah, you should know how you're planning to pay for it, right? Same as if you're leasing an apartment where you're going to live. Like, where's that money coming from? If you're developing a property, yes, you need to secure your funding, you know, obviously before that property starts or that project starts. But I don't think that anyone would feel like you're taking them for a ride or wasting their time if you're trying to start conversations to understand what's available for lease and how much it costs, right? Not everyone has all their money in hand right at the beginning, and having those conversations early on can be important in helping you understand really what your needs are and what your budget looks like. But I would certainly have a sense from a business standpoint of what your budget constraints look like, and generally speaking, how much you think you will be able to afford to lease or purchase a space. One thing we didn't talk about in purchasing is operating costs, and there are a bunch of them above and beyond, you know, that may, anyway, there's property taxes, and there's insurance, and all this stuff that you have to deal with if you own it, different from if you lease it. But yeah, I think you should, you know, in any case, you should have a sense of what you think your business can afford. And as you have conversations with brokers or with landlords, you should always have a kind of range in the back of your mind, even if you have not secured all of those funds yet. Any other questions? Hand up from Joyson.
Oh, yes. Hi there, Dan. Great presentation. I'm Joyson. I'm the founder of Jay's Watermelonade, an emerging social enterprise focused on hydration wellness. Right now, my businesses operate out of shared kitchen spaces, but over time, looking to scale products into retail facilities, but long term would kind of love to have our own manufacturing facility employing locally in the community. So it's great to hear about some of the programs and support systems that can, be involved in part of that process. My question is, for some of these programs, is there, some standards in terms of financial history or historical longevity of businesses that are required? Like I've seen some programs might require 3 years in business for a certain amount of annual revenues to kind of qualify for, kind of starting a new development of a commercial facility in the city.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'll say for kind of BDCs, relatively simple programs, we don't have any of those requirements. Any business can take advantage of our grants, but our grants are relatively small potatoes, right, in the scheme of things. When it comes to different programs, especially loan programs through BDC or through the state, there are going to be more rigorous underwriting standards, not too different from what a bank would require to give a loan. Now, ultimately, they may be able to have somewhat more relaxed requirements or offer more advantageous terms. But yeah, businesses that have been operating for a few years and have a track record of revenues and success, that all falls into the underwriting criteria that you're going to see for a lot of the financial assistance programs, especially the ones that are loan based. On the grant side, or even some of the loan programs, you may see the opposite, which is some programs may be geared towards startups and acknowledge up front that we want to encourage businesses to move, out of a home-based business into their first space, and there may be programs for that. So all of that to say that just because you're new and you're starting up, it does not necessarily lock you out of bank financing or financing through BDC or financing through other things. It does probably limit kind of the ceiling of what you can qualify for in terms from like a risk standpoint. They may say, well, you're brand new, so we're not going to like give you a big loan to build a building, but you have some operations and they've been small scale and this will allow you to scale up. So we feel comfortable issuing a loan for, some lesser amount that can get you into that next space. And I think the way you led off your introduction about your business is a really healthy way to think about business growth, right? You're in the shared kitchen space right now, and you're thinking about retail locations. You're thinking about a future manufacturing location, and the timing of that and the sequencing of that, ultimately is going to be driven by your own business's success. And too often people jump to that last one. Man, I want to have a manufacturing space, and then my business will be able to do all this and that. And it can get people into trouble, right? They can bite off more than they can chew. And the business itself is not ready to take on those additional spaces or that additional capacity. So I think that incremental approach is kind of a very healthy approach to growing that business so that your real estate obligations don't overwhelm your business's ability to succeed.
That's good to know. Thank you.
And excuse me, Michelle Geis from Impact Hub, who's one of the Base Network partners, put a comment in the chat that kind of speaks to that same question as well. And I think she has a really wonderful answer there. And Andy threw some extra context as well.
Okay, if anyone is still thinking about any questions that they may have, Please speak now, but also please also don't feel pressured to throw a question out if you feel like you haven't had enough time to process the presentation that just happened. The great thing about the Baltimore Development Corporation and Made in Baltimore are that we are public facing resources that are available to you outside of specific programs. For me, you are more than welcome to reach out to me at any time at brian@madeinbaltimore.org. I am available to connect you to any uh, resources available from our partner organizations, from the Base Network, from BDC, from any of the other logos that you've seen within this presentation. Um, Again, please don't feel pressured to feel like you need to know everything right now. The purpose of these spaces is for us to collectively learn and share together. We did a workshop on the 27th with John Renner about the basics of real estate 101 that talked a lot about terminology, about a lot of the key partners who you're going to be involved with along this process, and some of the language, the phrasing that you're going to run into as you navigate commercial real estate. Coming up on July 11th, we will be working with Michael Singer to discuss what it looks like to build your cost model for engaging commercial real estate, specifically around leasing versus buying. So this entire sort of collection of resources will be an evergreen collection of knowledge that will be available not only just on madeinbaltimore.org for free, but also our YouTube channel at the Made in Baltimore program for free. If you have any questions after this gets posted, again, please, please, please reach out to me. Made in Baltimore is a free program. You only need to manufacture a physical product here in Baltimore City and be in good standing with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation, or SDAT, and have an amazing attitude and want to see the best in Baltimore, which is what we're all here for. So I'm extremely thankful to you, Daniel, for this presentation. I'm extremely thankful for all of you for showing up, for having the audacity to work on behalf of people in Baltimore, for having the audacity to follow your own dreams. This is a great step in whatever sort of journey you're on. And I hope that everyone is leaving this feeling just a little bit better about their relationship with commercial real estate and their ideas around what some of their goals are for their business as it pertains to commercial real estate. That is it for this one, at least. We will see you all again on July 11th. Please, please, please make sure you head to either our Instagram at Made in Baltimore program, the website madeinbaltimore.org, to keep up with getting your free ticket to our next installment of this series. And with that, wishing everyone a graceful, peaceful day, joyous rest of the week, and a good summer. Thank you, thank you. And that is all, folks. See you later.